DC writing scene in a few words.
I would need an entire book to be able to describe DC's writing scene.
Multi-generational, colorful, fractured, unique.
Like, there's so much happening. So I think cornucopia would be the best word to describe DC's writing scene, because there's so much happening, though sometimes we don't all speak to each other.
When I moved to DC, I actually moved here for the purpose of trying to become a full-time artsy poet person, because I felt like DC really had the flavor for that, you know?
I'm a DC youngin', and Washington, DC, like, it's home. And so when you think about home, everything about home impacts everything about you.
I currently live in Southeast DC, in a community that's struggling, you know, financially and other things. And so I see a lot of hardship, a lot of different things that happen in other sides of the DC than happens here. So it began to influence my writing in such a way that I began to write about what I just saw every day walking my dogs in the neighborhood.
For me, my poems have like mumbo sauce all over them. You know what I'm saying? They have certain like references that a DC cat will recognize.
I grew up in North Carolina, Charlotte, and so I moved up there specifically because I heard about really the rich writing history and historical history of DC, especially as a place for Black writers. And I talked to some writers who either went to school here at Howard or lived here, and the most influential writer was E. Ethelbert Miller. He worked here at Howard, and I read his memoir called Fathering Words, and he talked about his experience coming from New York to DC, to Howard in the 60s and into the 70s, and how he kind of got embedded into the culture that was DC and all the legendary writers that he learned from at Howard, because DC is a really well-read city. And so all the legendary names that I heard from like Langston Hughes or Sterling Brown, and then the Black Arts Movement poets like Laini Mataka or Nikki Giovanni or Sonia Sanchez, I was really just like, wow, all of that is here.
I've had a lot of different responses. Let me think about one. Well, I think one of the responses that I have received from my writing has been that it can be very, particularly some of those pieces that may have been inspired by DC, right? Some of the input that I've received is that sometimes the writing can be very in your face, making the listener look at a reality that they may not want to look at. So I have a poem, for example, that's, what is the poem called? Grass Don't Grow in the Ghetto, okay? And it really was inspired by Michael from the shooting in Minnesota, but it was related to my community and what I was seeing in my community. And so sometimes when I do that piece, it forces people to look at the violence that's happening in our communities, the part that the system plays with those violent acts, and the part that the community itself plays with that repetition of those violent acts. So it forces some of that feedback is, man, your stuff is in your face. It makes you look at stuff we don't necessarily want to look at that way. And it's enlightening and provoking and sometimes challenging. And how that's influenced me as a writer to hear that kind of feedback. At first it's like, well, dang, does that mean you like it or you don't like it? I'm not sure what that means, but it has encouraged me not to be afraid to write about the real things in my way. I'm still a poet. Poetry can be like cryptic sometimes, but it has encouraged me not to be afraid to put the truth out there, even if it's difficult to swallow. one of my dream projects would be to, I'll say one of them because it's so many different things. I think one of them would be able to facilitate reflective writing workshops with young people who may be considered underserved, or, I hate the word at risk. I hate that terminology, but, young people that many others have written off, to facilitate programming around reflective writing workshops, giving those young people this voice and this space to express so they can change their maybe not so healthy ways of expressing or not so healthy ways of coping, like whether that's cussing people out, getting in fights, gun violence. Maybe they can find a different avenue to express through this pen. And now they are now empowered, and they can have, publications of books. So we would like to do writing workshops that are transformative for those young people, but out of it comes published anthologies of their work that again begin to recycle, going back out into the world, and then again people reading it, being healed, being transformed, and then finding their voice. So it kind of becomes this healing circle, for lack of better words. And I'd like to do that. I'm working on that with my nonprofit, but we're still very, very grassroots. But I'd like to see that at a global level. Like I would love to do reflective workshops across the nation, not just here in DC, but also in other countries, and produce several anthologies of the voices of these young people where they're being healed and their work helps heal others. Practice. And what I mean by that, I like to share or read aloud, whatever your lane, do it as much as possible. Put yourself in a position to force yourself to utilize that muscle. What I mean by that is when I moved to DC for the purpose of forcing myself to stand on stages in places I wasn't accustomed to standing, being embarrassed, bombing, but I had to do it to practice, to hone in the skill.
Write. Real simple. Write every day. Doesn't have to be a poem, doesn't have to be edited, doesn't have to just write every day. Something. Could be, you can start out with blah, 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 blah. I don't even know why I'm writing this. You know what? Somebody told me to write every day, so here I am writing every day. But every day feels different. And then you it evolves and it becomes something. Create a writing practice around your work, so that you find where you want to be as an artist.